What's up, friends? Today we are here with a quick little review on the Onsra TKP Trucks. These trucks are precision machined CNC aluminum trucks for your electric longboard. And I've got them used in a DIY scenario here. So today I'm going to share with you my thoughts after riding them for over 200 miles. Thanks for joining me today. If you're curious about this build that is sitting here in the background, this is actually the Black Mamba build that I just put out my first ride video on. And I've been absolutely loving this thing. The whole setup is awesome, and these trucks are a big part of that. So if you're interested in checking out some of those build videos, I'll be sure to check that out in the iCard, and you can see the whole build process from start to finish. Now, first off, where did I get these Onsra trucks? Some of you might not actually know that you can buy the Onsra trucks separately. A lot of the Chinese and other companies will sell you parts of their boards separately, but Onsra is specifically offering these as a kit, and that includes the truck itself, the motor mount plates, and the cross beams, and of course the front truck as well. So you can just go ahead and buy those straight up on their website, and it's pretty easy. I do have a link down in the description if you're interested. You can find them there. But Andre sent me these for review quite a long time ago, so sorry guys about taking so long on this video series, but it takes a while to integrate things into a DIY build. So here we are with the full review. At the beginning of this video, I was planning to say that I have been running these stock. These trucks are a little bit modified from what you would get in the box, but are pretty similar to what you get. So the bushing setup on here and the orientation of the pivot cups, not the pivot cups, the washers, the washer setup, all that is exactly how you get it out of the box. The motor mounts are exactly how you get it. Cross beams are how you get it out of the box. The mounting, I have them mounted drop through, pretty standard for these trucks. The one modification that I did do is I switched out the old axles in here, which were super short, for some larger ones. So the axles I have in here right now are 12mm axles straight through, and you might not know that you can switch the axles on these trucks, but it's actually fairly easy. The axles are held in by a single set screw on each end, and it interfaces with a little divot, and it's actually fairly easy to get them out. You just got to pop the set screw and pull the axle out. I replaced those with some modified 12mm shoulder bolts that I was able to use with these larger mountain board style wheels and tires, and the whole setup has worked out beautifully for me so far. I've got some Loctite in there to hold the axles in place, and I replaced the set screws back where they originally were. So we're almost on stock trucks. I don't think that the axle modification will really affect the ride feel at all. My ride width might be a tiny bit wider than it would have been on the stock axles, but only by maybe ½ an inch, just because of where the wheels ended up. So fairly stock conditions, so the things I tell you today will probably be present on most stock Onsra trucks. All right, so I've got 4 talking points I want to hit here, and the first of those is quality. Now, these trucks are very high quality. And what I mean by that is that these are fully CNC'd, there's no cast parts on them, and it's a really confidence-inspiring feeling to know that everything has been CNC'd. And I use that term sort of loosely because CNCing something doesn't necessarily mean it's always the highest quality, but all the machining on here looks great, and it's nice to not have a hanger that's cast with crazy weak points. I think all of the sizing on here is appropriate. The design of how the kingpin goes in is strong. I think the base plates are designed well. The motor mounts, of course, are really convenient, having the built-in shape on the hanger itself, and the anodization is good on them as well. So I really had zero issues with these quality-wise. It was a little bit confusing when I was assembling the whole setup at the back. The screw lengths were different for the cross beams and for these like guard holders. You might be able to see them. I'll put some B-roll or something. These guard holder screws they were a different size than I expected, but I figured it out, and everything with the trucks is high quality. I don't have any complaints. There's really nice CNC washers on here for the bushings, and those give you really locked in feeling. More to come on that. And yeah, great job on the quality. I'm impressed. All right, so these next two talking points are kind of, actually next three talking points are all sort of subjective, but I'll try to offer my opinions as someone who's ridden lots of different kinds of trucks. These were my first TKP truck, and with that comes obviously the learning curve of figuring out how the new truck geometry responds to your turning, to bumps, to hard turning. And so I just want to touch a little bit on maneuverability here. And for these in the stock setup, the maneuverability is a little bit interesting. What I found with TKPs is they have a kind of dead feeling. It's not like necessarily a negative thing, but the middle portion of your stance, like when it's at center, there's quite a bit of tilt that has to happen before it'll start turning. And what that basically does is when you're carving and stuff, it does give you sort of a dead feeling, like kind of a dampened feeling. And it cuts down on the maneuverability quite a bit, in my opinion. And keep in mind, I'm using 100% stock bushing setup here. All I've done is adjust the tightness. I've not flipped over the washers, which I've seen Fabian say that if you flip over the washers, they can have similar performance to DKPs. I really like testing these kinds of components on their fully stock setup. So I'm gonna try that later, and I'm gonna talk about that. But on the stock setup, I do find the maneuverability to be a little bit lacking. It can be pretty hard to do a single two-lane street turn on these, and don't even think about doing sidewalk turns. That would be crazy on the stock setup. So maneuverability does suffer a little bit. I think it's acceptable. Most of my commute riding or most of my group riding would be perfectly fine on the stock setup, but I think that some improvement can be made there across the stock bushing and stock washer setup. Next up, stability. Now, stability on these trucks has actually been super great. I've been all the way up to 37 miles an hour on these trucks, and that's using these SKP 7-inch tires, which are well balanced, and belt drive system on a drop-through deck. So my ride height is pretty high with these, actually. There's a lot of ground clearance, and the deck is fairly high off the ground, but I never really felt unstable. If there's anything I lacked, it was definitely the maneuverability, but stability has been great. Doing straight line runs with these has been awesome. Doing drag runs with these has been great. There's no weird wobbling or anything like that. I have knock-on speed wobbles on these trucks. I will say I consider myself a fairly good rider, and getting speed wobbles is a super rare thing. But I didn't have that issue with these trucks at all. And I would say that on my work commute that I ride, I average above 30 pretty easily for most of the ride without any issues. And that's on the stock bushing setup. So I think there are improvements to be made to balance the stability and maneuverability, but these lean towards being a more stable truck than a maneuverable truck in my experience so far. I want to touch briefly on how these compare to RKP and DKP trucks, because those are kind of the two other common trucks out there on the market. Ace has a lot of TKP trucks on their boards. X-Way has RKP and DKP. Meepo has TKP, DKP. I think they might have RKP. And what I'm talking about here is double kingpin, where there's two sets of kingpins that are not on the same base plate, or not on the same line like a PKP truck. And then reverse kingpin is like the standard truck that we used to use on almost every board out there before DKP became popular. DKPs are often known for having a ton of turn radius. You can do super small turns, and the RKPs are more known for stability. Boosted board got it super well on the RKP trucks, and they had a super playful set of Paris style trucks. The caliber 2 trucks are not usually as maneuverable, whereas DKPs are typically a lot more maneuverable depending on the bushing setup. My X-Way DKPs are not as maneuverable, and I think they actually compare, no, they don't compare to these. They're still quite a bit more maneuverable, but it really depends on how the truck is set up. So I would say that these fall somewhere between RKP and DKP. With the way you set up the bushings, you can achieve DKP performance, I think, but they're more like RKP in the sense that they're stable. So it's a really hard feeling to describe. I think most of it comes down to how the truck reacts when you get to the ends of your turn, how far it takes to get to the end of your turn. DKP trucks are super divey, and you have to turn your ankles a lot to get your full turn. These are not really that divey, but they do kind of bottom out when you get to the end of your turn. So they kind of just stop, and that can be a weird feeling. Some people don't prefer that. For me, I think it's been pretty good because a lot of the riding I do is more straight line and more commute style riding rather than carving a lot. You can carve on these trucks and it can be comfortable, but I think there are other trucks out there that are a lot more playful. Now that we've kind of talked about my experience with these in their stock setup, or stock, what am I going to experiment with? Well, first off, I think the easiest thing to do is to just flip over the washer on the front truck, this cupped washer. I'm just going to flip it over and see how much that improves my maneuverability. And then after that, I'll probably just take all the bushings out and switch over to Riptide, which is a very common thing to do with a lot of boards. And I do believe they have a custom one specifically for these trucks. So, and by one, I mean they have a custom machined pivot cup, and then they have the right height bushings for these trucks. Usually switching to Riptide is just the cheat code, and it makes your trucks a lot better. So I'll talk to some people and see what kind of setups they've got on their Onsra TKPs, but I think that there's a lot of room to improve, and I think these could become really awesome trucks. My other Hummie build, which is this deck, does have RKPs that are drop-through mounted, and I would say that the turning performance is actually similar, but I do have fairly stiff bushings on that deck, or on that RKP setup. So one other thing I want to mention, kind of going off of the previous topic, the RKP versus DKP, these trucks have a very high ride height. They have a very tall base plate. I can show you that real quick. I'll put some B-roll in, but essentially the height between the base plate here and where the hanger meets it is really high. And this deck is quite thick, so it actually lends itself to a tall base plate like this. But your setup may not necessarily like that much, and you might end up with a really high ride height if you're not able to drop them through. My ride height on these is definitely what I would say very adequate. I can fit like a full fist under here, so that's like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4-ish inches almost of clearance there. And the kingpin is the lowest point on these trucks, but I don't really see that as much of a problem. I haven't hit it at all, and you're probably not going to be off-roading with these trucks, so probably not that much of a concern. But one thing to keep in mind is that base plate height, and it does look kind of funny if you just mount it to the bottom of a deck rather than doing drop-through, as it's intended to be sort of a drop-in replacement for a DKP truck on a board that was made for DKP trucks. I thought a little bit about any changes that I might want to see on these trucks. And I think one thing off the top is I would like to see the axles being retained in a more robust way than just a single set screw into a flat spot on the, or sorry, not necessarily a flat spot, it's a cutout in the axle. I would like to see them retained a little bit better than that. Most of the mountain board truck companies use thread-in axles that are Loctited in a more permanent way. I haven't heard anyone complain about their Onsra axles popping out, but it just kind of throws me off a little bit. I do worry from time to time if my current axles that I've put in here are at risk of coming out. Fortunately, I've had no issues. I don't think most people will have issues, but if you're going to revise the trucks, I would look to see something that retains them a little bit more securely. The only other change I would make is also related to the axles. I think Onsra could easily offer different axle thickness options. Since they have a 12mm hole, they could easily offer 12mm, 10mm, or 8mm axles with a step on them. The step does decrease the strength, so that's kind of why I wanted to go with the full 12mm size, and that's compatible with these Newbee wheels that have the larger 28mm bearing diameter. So yeah, lots of options if Onsra were to offer some more axles. I also think that Onsra could work a little bit on their bushing setup from factory. Maybe they could work something out with Riptide. That would be an ideal scenario for Onsra to offer Riptide bushings. That would be sick. All right, now last thing. Who are these trucks for? Well, it's kind of hard to say because people that are buying their Black Car 3s, well, the trucks are already on there. So really, if you're buying these trucks on your own, you're either someone modifying a pre-built from another company or you're building your own DIY. For DIYs, these are fairly good trucks. I will say on the motor mounts, the thickness of the slot for the screw to go in is very small. So you end up having to use a really short screw. I had to use 6mm M4 screws to screw on my motors, and that doesn't feel super great because there's not very much grip in the threads there. Normally we use 8mm length screws to screw on the motor. They were bottoming out because of how thin the slot is, and I do worry a little bit about the integrity of that. So I think the motor mounts really should be revised to have a thicker slot there. But other than that, for DIY use, these are great. They are compatible with the Newbee new 4-gear drive system. They're also compatible with the Lin Power 4.3 gear drive system. Obviously you can use belts on here. The belt size I've got on here, I have a 68 tooth wheel pulley and a 16 tooth motor pulley, and I've got 3 90mm belts on here. And I'm currently using 12mm belt, but I have 15mm pulleys. So there's plenty of room. If you're using a standard width wheel, that's a non-mountain board style wheel, you shouldn't have issues with the stock axle length, but for me, it just was nowhere near enough, especially because I was making my own pulley. So for DIY use, honestly, they're not a bad option. I think before giving them my full go-ahead, I would say look into bushing options, maybe try someone else's Onsras to see if you're happy with their turn radius and with their performance. Obviously that's not an option for a lot of people. So I think most people will probably be happy with their performance as long as they switch out those bushings. Now, I guess closing thoughts. Thank you so much to Onsra for letting me try these out and throw them on a DIY board. I really like companies that encourage using their products for DIY use. I know X-Way is looking to offer their aux pack for DIY people, and there's tons of DIY vendors out there. So good to see Onsra stepping in and offering these to people that want to put them on their own boards. As for switching to these trucks on another board, should be fairly easy. I think some people may have compatibility issues with their belt lengths or their pulley setups. So make sure you check to see if they're compatible. That can be kind of hard, but these could be a good option to upgrade if you have cast DKP trucks and you want to have a more stable ride, or if you have RKP trucks and you just want to try something different. So I think there is a lot of people that can benefit from having these trucks, and I want you guys to let me know down in the comments. Have you bought these trucks? Have you tried them out before? What do you think of them? Let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching this review, and stay safe, keep on riding, and peace out.